Good morning, everyone, dear friends. This presentation is about education, specifically pedagogical leadership in school organization. The presentation invites us to think about pedagogical leadership in the contemporary school, caused by diversity, social fragmentation, and the demand for meaningful learning for all. Today's schools calls for a more complex forms of leaderships, dynamic, distributed, and deeply ethical. Pedagogical leadership can be understood as a dynamic process of direction and influence whose ultimate purpose is the optimization of learning for all students. It is not merely another administrative function, but a mechanism that operates as a critical bridge between macro level educational policy and the everyday life of the classroom. Leithwood, they, Sammons, Harris, and Hopkins, 2006, captured this idea while reforms, curricula, and educational policies only became real when someone's a leadership teams, a teachers, a community, translate them into concrete practice. Without that mediation, educational policy remains on paper with it's become tangible improvement. This definition shifts the center of gravity of leadership away from the persons who exercise the counterward effects it produces, since what matters is whether final leadership translate into better conditions for teachings and learning. It is this functional perspective that later allows us to think of leaderships as a distributed practice rather than as an attributed like to a position. The pedagogical leaders carries out two essential and interdependent functions. The first consists of setting definite directions, giving meanings, purpose, and direction to the school organization by collaboratively building shared visions and communicating high expectation to all institutional actors. The second consists an exercise influence, motivating, mobilizing, and engaging teachers, students, and the families to move collectively towards that vision. This second functions influence requires competence that belongs to the relational domain, interpersonal intelligence, persuasive ability, and above all, the capacity to generate social capital. That is, networks of trust and cooperation that sustains collective works over time. Without that social capital, no shared vision can endure beyond this founding rhetoric. Our on the synthesis by Leithwood, 2006, the concrete practice of successful leaderships can be organized into four broad categories that function as a kind of operational map for any leadership teams or teacher who takes on a pedagogical leadership roles. Setting directions, identifying and inspiring visions, fostering groups, goals, and communicating high expectation that guide institutional works. Developing peoples, offering intellectual stimulation, individual supports, mentoring, and modeling of values that accompany teachers' professional growth. Redesigning the organization, creating structural and cultural conditions that facilitate teaching, sustainable by a culture of collaboration and mutual trust. Managing the instruction programs, monitoring student progress, protecting instruction times, and align available resources with institutional pedagogical priorities. It is important to stress that these four practices, on the contrary, demand a high sensibility to context, especially in school facing challenging circumstances of process of underperformance. Applying this category mechanically without attending to each institution's particularities, it is its history, its community, its resource, risks turning pedagogical leaderships into an empty formality. The evidence accumulated over recent decades has definitely displaced the heroic leadership models to long figure capable of transforming an education institution single-handedly. In its place, the frameworks of distributed leadership, Leithwood 2006, has become established according to which school improvement depends on the joint influence of multiple actors, administrators, teachers, work teams, and families, all sharing responsibility for processes of change. Within these distributed frameworks, the teachers emerge as pedagogical leaders when at least four conditions are met. They participate actively in pedagogical decision making, not only in its execution. They are integrated into professional learning communities where teachers' knowledge circulates and builds collectivity. They use evidence that results systematic observation to improve their own practice. They act with ethical commitment toward equality and social justice, not as a discursive addendum but as the horizons of their work. Distributing leaderships without clear structures of accountability can dilute responsibility, producing a vague sense that everyone leads and consequently that not one is fully accountable for results. Likewise, the overload placed on the teacher's lead becomes a concrete risk when institutions fail to support this emerging leadership with adequate policies, times, and institutional recognition. To be genuine and sustainably distributed leadership needs organizational condition that supports it. Otherwise, it becomes an individual overload distinguished as collective participation. Teachers' pedagogical leadership take on a particular ethical dimension when it is explicitly linked to equity and following Theo Harris 2007, the teacher leader must be willing to question the cultural deficit assumptions that often intentionally run thought schools practice and explain certain students' failures by appealing to their backgrounds of others than reviewing the institution own practice. It's in response for this pedagogical leadership committed to equality actively promotes equitable learning opportunity for all. The ethical dimension considerably broadens the scopes of the concepts. Pedagogical leadership is no longer thought of solely in terms of academic effectiveness, better results, better indicators, but is a position as a moral responsibility oriented towards social transformation. To lead pedagogically in this sense also implies taking a political stance on what kind of schools and what kind of society we want to build. If leadership is distributed, the administrator's roles is redefined. Rather than a position of centralized authority, the leadership team's role is better understood as the capacity to build a shared vision and mobilize the educational community around it. In this sense, the administrator acts as a mediator of conflicts, a facilitator of collective works, and a promoter of institutional culture, rather than as an unilateral executor of decision. This redefinition turns school administration into a collective process aimed at strengthening institutional capacity as a whole, rather than merely solving isolated problems. The administrators who mediate, who facilitate, and who promote institutional culture is, strictly speaking, exercising the same two universal functions notes at the outset, setting directions and exercising influence, but from a position that enough rather than concentrates the leadership of other actors in the educational community. Pedagogical leadership is a multifaceted concept, distributed, contextually sensitive, and ethically committed. It moves decisively away from the model of centralized authority to become a collective practice of direction, influence, and educational transformation. Thinking it thought means examining in each specific school, in a specific educational organization, who decides, who accompanies, who mediates, and who is committed to ensuring that all students, without exception, have real opportunity to learn. This is all. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you.